Hey guys, it's Konrad Bobilak here, CEO of Investor Prime Real Estate and also author of Australian Property Finance Made Simple. And I've made a short video for you here today talking about leverage and the importance of leverage when it comes to building wealth in property. And this has a lot to do with psychology, and I want to go through how imperative it is for you guys to get this, especially for those listening to this video right now who want to build wealth through property. Because over the last 20 years, I've observed that there is actually one big obstacle stopping people from building wealth through property, and it has nothing to do with financial literacy. It actually has to do with the psychology and the paradigms, which have to do with leverage and understanding how the rich build wealth through property and how the poor and middle class build wealth through property. And that's why I've created this short video just to go through those topics. Now, a bit of a company disclaimer, this is purely for educational purposes only, and also I'm not here to tell you that by following this information you're going to become wealthy. Just like joining a gym doesn't guarantee you're going to get fit. Now, here's a famous quote that you've probably heard before: the rich keep getting richer and the poor get poorer. It's very true, especially in Australia, especially Melbourne and Sydney. In the last 10 years, you've seen property prices quadruple, and a lot of people are completely priced out of the property market. In fact, wealth will come down to those with property and without property in Australia to a large extent, especially in the next 20, 30 years. And there's going to be a massive division of wealth and classes for the first time, which is kind of unfortunate really, because one of the things I love about Australia was 10, 15 years ago, everyone was on a kind of even playing field. And now there's suburbs in Melbourne that are extremely expensive and unaffordable, and there's suburbs where if you don't have $3 million, you don't even bother looking in, you know, and you've probably heard of the same thing happening in Sydney to a larger extent. I believe that the rich will continue to get rich until the middle class and the poor start getting educated and becoming financial literate. And that's the key. So when we talk about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, don't get depressed, because you have a choice at the end of the day. And the choice is whether you're going to get the education or not get the education. Remember, wealth is simply a transfer of money between the uneducated and the educated. And that's all that happens. It's a transfer effect. So you have the ability to get educated and become financially literate. We'll talk throughout this video how to do that. I want to tell you that financial literacy is the key of becoming successful in finance, but it's not so much just for the sake of financial literacy. It's because it changes your paradigm, your belief system, especially about leverage and ownership, and more specifically about the difference between good debt, bad debt, and leverage. And that's what it comes down to. The rich already know that the only way to build wealth is through leveraging other people's money in an asset called property. See, property doesn't actually perform that well. If you look at the average detached house in Australia, it's performed the average 10% in the last 10 years. In the best major capital cities, you know, it's performed quite higher, but you can get returns, massive returns in the stock market and other things that far outperform real estate. So as an asset, it's an average performing asset, but once you put leverage into the equation, property will outperform virtually every other asset class because of leverage, because you can borrow 95% of other people's money to buy real estate, and you can't do that with any other asset in Australia. And this is the reason why I wrote Australian Property Finance Made Simple. In fact, when I started writing my books, the first book that I started writing was Australian Real Estate Investing Made Simple, which was a whole formula or recipe on how to build and structure a large property portfolio. 14,000 words into the book, when I got into the finance section, I actually realized that the main thing was finance and the lack of financial literacy. And then I stopped writing this book and I went back to writing this book, which is the first book that I actually released, because I believe that financial literacy is what's holding most people back from building large wealth. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail in this video exactly what that means. This book will be coming out in 2018, hopefully. I'll be massively procrastinating with this book, but eventually I'm going to get around finishing it. It's nearly finished anyway. It's just in the final stages of editing. So that's something that I'm writing. I'm also doing the Australian Property Due Diligence Made Simple book, which will be out in 2019, and the Real Estate Millionaire Mentor book, which will be out in 2022, give or take a year or two, which is really cool. And the reason I'm writing all these books, guys, is because I want to educate investors out there and empower them to give them the tools to understand how to create true wealth. And I mean wealth, that multi-generational wealth, not just become wealthy, you know, and make $1 million or $500,000. I'm talking about real wealth that's there for life, replacing your income, and also having the ability and empowering people to change the paradigms of their children. Because effectively the school system has let us down. You know, I mean, I finished business commerce and I've written, not even one day has anyone taught me how to make money. You know, and I spent 4 years at Monash University. Not one day has anyone sat down and said, this is how you make money in real estate, this is how you structure your property portfolio, this is how you replace your income. Isn't that crazy? I mean, it should be compulsory education. Also, at the end of this video, I'm going to give you a home study with $497 or access to a home study online that you can watch at your leisure, no strings attached, absolutely free. Now, if we look at the essence of what we're doing, I believe that if you look at the biggest truth about life is that everything is very simple. If the answers are complicated, I don't believe that's the real answer. If you look at the word capitalism, capitalism is about capital appreciation. You know, if you look at the definition of capitalism, capitalism is an economic system based on private ownership of the means of production and their operation from profit. Characteristics central to capitalism include private property, capital accumulation, wage, labour, voluntary exchange, price system, competitive markets. The key is, and this is what the rich have known for decades, is that the way to become rich in a capitalistic world is to accumulate capital. It's all about growth and leverage. It's not about cash flow. The poor always chase cash flow. The rich quietly grow their wealth by accumulating assets and growth assets, because you can turn capital into, or equity into cash very quickly. You know, you can get a line of credit against equity in your property. If you bought a property in Melbourne 10 years ago in Yarraville and Williamstown, you would have quadrupled your money. Properties went from 250 to $1 million. That means those people have made 600,000 to 750, maybe 800 in equity. Now, when you go to a bank and you draw equity and you draw out cash from your bank account, I've never heard a banker ask me, Konrad, did you work hard for your money? Is this the money that you worked really hard for, or is this money that you're taking out that's lazy equity money? Isn't that interesting? They never ask me that. All they do is, how much would you like? Would you like $100 bills or $50 bills? Isn't that interesting? No one ever asked me, is this equity or is this money that you work for? Cash is cash. It doesn't matter whether you work hard or whether it came to you easy. And that's the biggest thing about property investing. It doesn't need to be hard. People just make it hard. Leverage, definition of leverage is the use of various financial instruments or borrowed capital, such as margin, to increase the potential return on investment. And that's what the game is all about. It's about leveraging other people's money in an asset called property. Now, here's a wealth distribution table from Capgemini from the World Wealth Report. And it's a very interesting thing, because if you look at the wealth distribution, how much people own in this world combined, if you look at the ideal situation, the top 20%, the rich, would control probably around 30% of wealth. And then the middle class would ideally control majority of everything. And then you've got the bottom 20% having a little bit of assets behind them. And this is what the ideal scenario is. Now, what people think, being pessimists by nature, we say, well, it's kind of worse than that. The rich, the top 20% control, let's say 60%. The middle class control around 35%, and then the poor control 5%. But the reality is much worse than that. The reality is the top 15 and the top 5 control the vast majority of all assets and capital in this world. 70% of everything is owned by the top 20%. 29% of what's remaining is controlled by the middle class, which is predominantly locked up in housing and residential housing, and to some smaller extent, stocks, bonds, annuities, and term deposits. And the bottom 20% only control 1% of assets in the world. So obviously, if you want to become wealthy, you've got to think about the reality of why these people tend to control the vast majority of wealth out there, and where they focus their energy and their money. And this is exactly what this video is all about. The only difference between the rich person and the poor person is how they use their time. And that's the key. It's not just about realizing what the reality is, it's also about you realizing that you have a choice where you're going to end up. You have a choice whether you're going to end up in the top 15% or in the bottom 20%. And that has to do with how you use your time, who you listen to, what books you read, how educated you are, and what choices you're going to make in life. If you make a decision, a conscious decision, and I did this years ago, to read 2 hours a night and educate yourself, then after 2 years or 3 years of constant compounding of knowledge, you're going to become very intelligent in a chosen area. When I was 18, I made a conscious decision to stop watching TV completely. And I did not watch any TV at all. I read the Fin Review, so I kept up to date with the Economic Times and what's happening in the economy. But what I did was I made a conscious decision every night to read for an hour and a half. And on average, it used to take me about 8 days to read a book. So over the next, which on average means that I could read about 20 books per year, while maintaining a full-time job and having a balance in my life. So over the next 5 years, I literally read over 100 books on real estate investing. In fact, I've read every single book on real estate investing that's been published in Australia, with the exception of the last 7, because I haven't got around to them. And to be honest with you, I'm getting bored reading the same topics over and over, so I've kind of given up on reading them. But the amount of books that I used to go through was extraordinary, and anyone can do this. You don't need to go on the dole and just start reading all day. You can just make a conscious decision to put time aside every night and educate yourself, and that's what I did. And that's the difference between the rich and the poor, is how you use your time. And here's other differences that you need to be aware of. The average person avoids and fears investing because they have no financial literacy. They buy things that cost them money. They buy things like cars, plasma screens, things that depreciate in value. They have bad debts, credit cards, personal loans. They pay full tax, and then they wonder why they're paying full tax and they can't invest. They get advice from uninformed friends and family who are in the same boat. Also, if you have fear of investing, buy things that cost them money, work full time and pay full tax. They work harder and they lose opportunity and time. The wealthy, which ends up in procrastination, not the inability to take action. The educated investor knows that they must invest. They buy things that make them money. They buy real estate, commercial real estate, they buy shares that pay dividends. They use good debt, and they know how to distinguish between good debt and bad debt, and that's the key. They minimize their tax. They get advice from experts and specialists. Remember, the most expensive advice is free advice. The cheapest advice is when you're paying $1,000 an hour for an expert to give you the right advice. Just think about that for a second. And that took me years to understand. Never ever cut corners on getting the right advice. They work smarter. They use opportunities and time, and they take action. They take action because they've conditioned themselves to become financially literate. They know how to analyze deals, and they've got the team that they can rely on to help them make informed decisions. So your relationship with debt will largely determine the level of success you'll be able to achieve as a property investor. The wealthy have a positive relationship with debt because they distinguish between good debt and bad debt. And this is the number one reason why I believe people are not building wealth today, because they still don't distinguish between good debts and bad debts, and they have no financial literacy. Good debt is defined as tax-deductible debt used to purchase or leverage assets which appreciate in value. For example, a line of credit used to trade shares, margin lending, or interest-only loans used to buy investment properties. Bad debts are anything with a switch on it. If you can turn it on, if it's got wheels or an engine, it's bad. Bad debt is all other debt which has no tax deductibility advantages, and it's predominantly used to purchase consumables and assets which depreciate in real value. For example, home loans for owner-occupied property, bad debt. It's still the asset appreciates, but you cannot claim it as a tax deduction. Personal loans and credit cards. Credit cards and personal loans are a killer, especially with the younger generation. Instant gratification. My generation was taught to delay gratification. Now, you don't want to delay it indefinitely, okay, but you want to be smart with your money. There's a massive difference between the psychology of a sophisticated investor and the average person. The educated investor focuses on building equity and increasing the good debts. The true aim of a property investor is to maximize the amount of money you control in an asset called real estate. It's all about leveraging equity using mortgages. That's all it is. And to do that, you have to have a good relationship with debt, because otherwise, think about this. How are you going to build a large property portfolio is every time you buy a property, you're taking on a new mortgage. If your paradigms or internal dialogue is negative and you have a negative association with mortgages, you're going to be repelling property opportunities. So the number one reason why people don't buy a lot of properties is because they have a fear of debt and fear of debt accumulation. They don't know how to manage money. They don't know how to work out cash flow analysis. And it becomes too hard, and you know what? We just don't want another mortgage. That's the reality. And have a look at this, and I've spoken to this, you would have seen this example before on some other videos that I've put up in YouTube, but this is the difference between a growth asset and an income generating asset. Many people believe that if they buy a property that's giving them 10% return in cash flow, but only a 4% growth, they're going to outperform growth properties. You know, I keep hearing about cash flow positive properties being superior to growth properties, where they're not. And let me show you an example. Let's take two properties with $300,000. One is in a regional area, and one is like a studio apartment in Melbourne or Sydney. Okay, the studio apartment in Melbourne or Sydney gives you 10% capital growth if it's the right area, obviously, and you get a 4% rental yield. Whereby the cash flow positive property, let's go it's Mildura or regional town, will give you 4% capital growth but 10% rental. Over 20 years, your growth property is worth $2 million, giving you $80,000 rental per annum, while the cash flow positive property is only worth $657,000, giving you $65,000 cash flow per annum. Because remember, it's 4% on the value of the property. So growth property is superior compared to a cash flow positive property, not only in the equity that you make, but eventually in the rental as well. And this is what the rich have known for years, building wealth by focusing on growth properties rather than on cash flow positive properties. And this is true for all regional areas and mining towns and any kind of property in Australia. You can build wealth faster by focusing on growth properties rather than cash flow positive properties. Now, if you're smart about it, you're going to use two and combine them together because of DSR ratios, which is a formula the banks use to assess your serviceability, which I explain in my book. So if you look at leverage is everything, and this table is really what it's all about. Without leverage, you cannot make returns on property. So in the first example, let's assume you have an asset, let's not even call it property, let's just call it a theoretical asset, which is returning 11%, which is a combination of growth and yield, which is property on average, 7% return on growth and 4% rental yield. And the cost of funding is 7%. Now it's 7% because it's 4% plus 3% in expenses associated with holding the property. Now, in scenario number one, you're starting off with $100,000 in every scenario. Scenario number one, there is no leverage. So you're not borrowing any money. So this is for the people that say, I don't want to have any debts, I just want to buy things for cash, okay? You're starting off with 100 grand, your total value of the asset that you're controlling is 100,000. 11% on 100 is 11,000. There's no interest because you haven't borrowed any money. So your return is 11,000, which is a cash return of 11%, which is you're starting with 100, getting a return of 11,000, 11%. In scenario two, you're actually leveraging money and you're borrowing 50% against your money. So you're putting in 100 and borrowing another 100. But this time, so your leverage is 50%, you're controlling $200,000 of that asset. 211% is 22,000, less the 7,000 for borrowing 100,000 is 15,000. Your cash return is 15%. Number three, 80% LVR. You know, you're controlling now with 100,000, which is real estate with no lender's mortgage insurance, you're controlling a $500,000 asset. 11%, that's $55,000 gain, less 28,000 in costs. You're getting 27,000 or 27 cash return. So remember, you're still putting in 100,000, but here you're getting $27,000 return on your money, which is 27%. 90% if you pay lender's mortgage insurance. Here you're getting 47,000 for the 100 you invested, or 47%. And obviously, if you're putting no money down, okay, if you're doing vendor finance or gifted deposits or rebates, you can generate an infinity return. How cool is that? Imagine you're at a barbecue. People saying, what return are you getting on your property portfolio? And you tell them, well, last transaction I actually got an infinity return. You sound like an idiot if you say that. But the reality is there are deals where you can pull off, where you're literally putting no money in. I've settled properties with no money down, where I've actually had cash deposited into my trust account, sorry, not a trust account, but an account from a trust at settlement, and I've paid no fees for the property, which is incredible. I truly got an infinite return on my money. And that's the beautiful thing about real estate. You can only do this with real estate. You can't do it with shares, stocks, or bonds, or any other asset class. And this is what the rich have known for decades. It's all about leveraging other people's money, and it's about not focusing on return on the asset, it's return on your equity, how much you're putting in, how much you're getting out. And that's the key to building wealth. As Archimedes says, give me a place to stand and a lever long enough and I will move the world. Remember, it's all about leverage. Leverage is the key. Interested in learning more? I hope you enjoyed this short video. For those who are interested in learning more, I'm running a small number of events this year called the Real Estate Investing Fast Track Weekends. And these are very small, intimate events, limited to only 40 people per event. Now you can check out the dates below. If you scroll down below this video, there'll be a link to the event and you can check out the dates. They book out really quickly and there's only a handful of these that are run every year. They're really cool because the amount of education that people get in those 2 days is virtually equivalent of spending 3 or 4 days, you know, reading dozens and dozens of books. In fact, the next one that we're running is virtually oversubscribed, so you're going to have to wait a few months to get into these events as well. Day one is all about finance, how to structure and build your property portfolio, investor psychology, developing a plan, and assembling a team of experts around you. Day two is all about research, due diligence, and the cool thing is we take you out of the classroom environment, put you onto a bus, and drive around Melbourne looking at investment properties and looking at suburbs. It's an amazing 2-day event. For those who are interested, just check out the dates. And once again, what we do is there's 4 critical stages of developing and building a large property portfolio. And these 4 things have to come together for you to become successful. Number 1 is psychology, and leveraging and understanding what this whole game is about is part of your psychology and part of your paradigms. Number 2 is developing the right plan and system, which is crucial. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Then developing a team of experts around you, because at the end of the day, your accountant, your mortgage broker, your property strategists have to help you to implement these strategies. And then number 4 is understanding property selection methodology, which is at the end of the day, you've got to buy properties that actually go up in value. Now in Melbourne, there are 390 suburbs, only 45 of them are worth investing in, so you've got to make the right choices, you've got to make the right decisions. When all these things come together and they're all synchronized, that's the very definition of success. And that's exactly what I teach people over 2 days. So for those who are interested, check out the dates below. Also, if you can't make it to the event, as a bare minimum, definitely get a copy of my book, Australian Property Finance Made Simple. You can check it out on the website, bookonfinance.com.au, or check it out on amazon.com.au or on eBay. It's probably about $10 by now. If you are tight ass, check it out on eBay, you get a second-hand copy. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning, because you've stayed to the very end, I'm going to reward your efforts by giving you access to a free home study, no strings attached, worth $497. And literally what it is, it's absolutely free, and it's 10 hours of video, plus a 265-page manual with about 397 slides. It's super easy to use. It's literally point, click, and view. And then you have the manual there in the PDF document, which follows all the PowerPoints in the actual home study. It's a recording of the Real Estate Investing Fast Track Weekend from a couple of years ago. It's still very current. 10% is outdated because the market obviously has moved in the last 2 years, but 90%, all the fundamentals remain the same. So just as a super cool bonus, absolutely free, no strings attached, all you got to do is check out the link below, or just type in this URL into your browser and you can access this home study absolutely free. It's literally invaluable. The information there could change your life if you watch it and implement it. If you don't implement it, it's not going to change your life. You just wasted 10 hours of your life. Okay, that's it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for future videos, and also subscribe to my YouTube channel so you get notifications sent on any future videos that I'll do. This is Konrad Bobilak signing out. I'll see you on the inside.